The night my family packed my things, I learned what betrayal really sounds like. The slow zip of a suitcase that used to hold my life. My name is Bernetta Langford, and that night, I stopped being someone's daughter and became a burden to be removed. My mother didn't cry. My brother didn't look at me. They just kept folding, sorting, throwing, as if erasing me could make their lives easier. "Bernetta," my mother said quietly, "we can't keep doing this. You need help. Somewhere else." Somewhere else. Two words that cut deeper than the accident that nearly took my legs. I gripped my crutch until my hand shook. The pain in my spine was nothing compared to the one in my chest. When the door closed behind me, I promised myself one thing. One day, they'd regret watching me walk away. I used to think the ocean's fury was the most terrifying thing I'd ever face. I was wrong. Nothing rages harder than a family deciding you no longer belong. 3 weeks after the Casco Pier collapse, I was still moving slow, still learning how to stand without wincing. My crutch leaned in the corner. The painkillers lined up on the table like quiet witnesses to what I'd lost. The doctor said I'd walk again by summer. I brought that hope home like a gift. But hope doesn't fit in every household. My mother didn't even turn from the window when she said it. "We're not a nursing home, Bernetta. You need proper care, somewhere else." The words hit harder than the steel beam that crushed my back. I looked at Elliot. He kept his eyes on the floor, folding my sweaters, slipping framed photos of Dad and me into a garbage bag as if they were old bills. "I'll clear your room," he said. "We can rent it out for the season." The room that once smelled of sawdust and sea air, the one I rebuilt plank by plank after Dad's death, was already stripped bare. I picked up the photo before it disappeared into the bag. Dad smiling, wind-tossed, saying, "If you can design for the sea, you can survive anything." I stepped outside into the cold night. The salt wind stung the scar across my spine, but I didn't cry. There was nothing left to ask for, nothing left to prove. The real fall hadn't happened on the scaffolding that day. It happened here, on my own doorstep, with my family watching me go. I left the old house in the rain, dragging a single suitcase and a silence too heavy to name. The apartment I found sat near the harbor, small and weathered, its window facing the gray Atlantic. The air smelled of salt and old wood, memories that refused to fade. On my first morning, I set my desk by the window and spread out my unfinished blueprints. My hands still trembled, but the lines slowly found their rhythm again. Every morning I did my therapy to the pulse of the tide. Inhale on the rise, exhale on the retreat. At night, I powered up my laptop and logged into an old file. Tide lock, a coastal defense plan I drafted for the U.S. Coast Guard before the accident. No one in my family knew I still had access. They thought I was broken. They didn't know I was rebuilding, in silence and in secret. Rain battered the glass the night my screen lit up with an email from Commander Harris. "Tide lock project approved. You'll be listed as Chief Marine Architect." I stared at the words, letting them steady me like a hand on my back. They thought I was living off insurance. They had no idea I had just returned. Stronger than ever. I didn't need to announce it. I just needed to wait for the tide to rise. A week later, Martha, my old neighbor, stopped by with a pie and gossip. "They're saying you've lost your mind from the painkillers. Bernetta!" I laughed, not surprised. My family always knew how to rewrite history, so they came out sympathetic. Elliot had just been promoted to regional manager at North Bay Development, the largest construction firm in the area. The local paper showed him smiling beneath the headline, "North Bay competes for major harbor project." I knew exactly which one, Tide Lock. And if his company won the bid, he'd have to report directly to me. I didn't expose them. I didn't correct the story. Let them brag about a victory they hadn't earned. The ocean keeps its secrets until it's ready. And when it rises, no one can stop the waves. By February, Bar Harbor lay buried under snow thick as silence. I had just finished my morning therapy when the call came from Washington. "Ms. Langford, Your presence is requested at the Department of Defense. Monday morning. I hadn't heard that kind of authority in a voice since the hospital, the sound of people who decide what happens next. I booked the earliest flight. The Pentagon rose from the ground like a block of frozen steel, cold and deliberate. When I pushed open the conference room door, rows of uniforms turned toward me. Their stares said we weren't expecting a woman, much less one with a crutch. One of them introduced me. This is Chief Marine Architect, Ms. Bernetta Langford, the mind behind Tidelock. For a moment, the room froze. A gray-haired officer leaned forward. After the accident, do you still trust the ocean, Ms. Langford? I met his eyes. I don't fear the ocean, I said evenly. I fear people who only stand beside you when it's calm. No one answered, but from the corner, Commander Harris gave a small nod, silent recognition that I'd drawn the line. When the projector flickered on, I saw it immediately. The North Bay Development logo in the bottom corner of the slide, with the note subcontractor application pending. I felt my pulse slow, not speed up. Who's responsible for this? I asked. Someone murmured. Your brother's name came up in connection to the bid. I nodded once. Suspend review, I said. Potential conflict of interest. They obeyed without question. Walking out, Commander Harris caught up to me. You handled that with more grace than most generals I know. I smiled faintly. They taught me patience, I said. I just changed the classroom. That night, back in my hotel room, snow pressed against the window like foam on dark water. The first wave had risen, and I wasn't planning to run from it. 2 weeks later, my phone rang again. This time, my mother's voice, too sweet to be sincere. Bernetta, come home for dinner. The family wants to talk. I already knew what that meant. When I arrived, everything was staged to look effortless. The scented candles, the new tablecloth, the faint sound of piano from a speaker. The air smelled of forced civility. They smiled like hosts, greeting a guest they barely knew. Elliot started first, his tone polished smooth. We're thinking of selling the house. You know, things have been tight. Mom chimed in softly. That house is far too big for you now. You need care, not property. I glanced around. The photograph of Dad and me, once hanging above the mantel, was gone. The bare patch on the wall gleamed under the lamplight, spotless and soulless. You need a house, I said quietly. I need peace. Elliot gave a small laugh. You're still upset about the past? We were only trying to help. I lifted my glass, met his eyes. The last time you helped me, I had to leave in a wheelchair. Silence. The kind that presses down until even breathing feels heavy. When I stepped outside, the night air cut against my face, sharp and clean. My phone buzzed. A new message lit the screen. Press release confirmed. Monday, 7 a.m. Department of Defense announcement. I stood there under the porch light and felt something I hadn't in months. An honest smile. By Monday morning, my name would be everywhere, and the people who threw me away would have to face the truth they'd buried. I looked back once at the house and whispered to the wind, You wanted a house sale? I'm about to sell your illusion instead. Monday morning, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating nonstop. The first message was from Commander Harris. It's out. Congratulations. Chief Langford. I turned on the TV. The Department of Defense logo filled the screen, and beneath it, a headline scrolled across CNN. Bernetta Langford leads $280 million federal defense project. The woman behind Tidelock. A photo of me appeared, standing with my crutch beside the scale model of the harbor. The first feeling wasn't pride, it was quiet. Even the sea outside my window seemed still. Calls began pouring in. Reporters, old colleagues, local journalists, and then my mother. I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, Martha texted. Elliot just walked out of his office. They're saying his contract was suspended. So, North Bay Development, my brother's company, had lost its subcontract. The official statement cited conflict of interest. By noon, Bar Harbor had turned into a rumor mill. Headlines flooded Facebook. Local family once called her a burden. Now their daughter leads the nation's defense project. I imagined my mother at the salon, hearing it for the first time, knocking over a tray of hair dye in shock. I poured a cup of coffee and sat by the window. No laughter, no anger, no noise, only light, waves, and the slow, steady rhythm of peace. That afternoon, NBC called. They wanted to interview me about overcoming adversity. I agreed, on one condition: my family would not be mentioned. On live TV, the anchor asked, "What kept you going after the accident, Ms. Langford?" I smiled. The same tide that knocked me down taught me how to rise again. The internet exploded. Newspapers ran my photo with the headline, "Resilience has a new name." By evening, my family's efforts to stay invisible failed. Their names, their photos, were everywhere. The story had grown beyond them. The tide had taken control. Late that afternoon, while I was sorting papers, the doorbell rang. I didn't need to check who it was. When I opened the door, my mother stood there, her hair disheveled, eyes red. Elliot lingered behind her, hands shoved deep into his pockets, unable to meet my gaze. We just want to talk," she said. I stepped aside, letting them in. The apartment was bright and warm, sunlight spilling across polished wood floors, the kind of peace they could never buy. They sat stiffly on the sofa, eyes roaming the room until they landed on the framed blueprint of the Tidelock Harbor. Elliot spoke first, voice tight. "I didn't know you were working with the Defense Department. I just wanted to help." I looked straight at him. "Help? The last time you helped me, I left your house in a wheelchair." My mother leaned forward, trembling. "We made a mistake. Bernetta, come home. We can start over." I turned toward the window. "I don't need to go home," I said softly. "I built my own." I reached into my folder and placed a brochure on the coffee table, the Langford Foundation for Injured Workers. "If you want to make things right, this fund helps people who lost their jobs to accidents. Donations can be anonymous." She began to cry, not from guilt, but from losing control. Elliot finally spoke. "I'm sorry. And my company's under investigation." I met his eyes. "Maybe that's how you learn. Not everything I lost was a failure." The silence that followed was heavy, fragile. When they finally left, I watched their figures shrink down the hallway, small, unmoored, like people who'd just realized they'd sold their souls for appearances. I turned back to my desk. My phone buzzed again. "Commander Harris." "Press response overwhelming. You've just become the face of resilience," I typed back. "I didn't plan revenge, Commander. I just stopped hiding." I set the phone down and let the sunset wash through the glass, painting the Tidelock design in gold. Outside, the sea kept rising, steady, certain, mine. 3 days after the story went public, I flew to Washington, D.C. The hotel hosting the Department of Defense event glowed like a beacon long before sunrise. The corridors were lined with uniforms, reporters, and advisors, faces I'd only known through signatures at the bottom of government emails. I walked slowly, the sound of my crutch tapping against the marble echoing down the hall. A young officer opened the door to the main conference room. On the stage hung the emblem of the Department of Defense, the words beneath it gleaming in gold. "Tidelock Expansion, securing our shores for the future." The moment I entered, the murmurs faded. Cameras swung in my direction, the light hitting my face like surf breaking on steel. I didn't flinch. I'd hidden from brightness long enough. The program director stepped to the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Chief Marine Architect Bernetta Langford, the woman who turned her own accident into a blueprint for national resilience." I took the microphone. The room fell completely silent. "I was told my accident ended my career," I began, "but what it really ended was my silence." A ripple moved through the crowd. I continued. The sea doesn't forgive, it teaches. And when it takes something from you, it leaves behind a lesson, builds stronger. Applause thundered across the room. I saw Commander Harris rise to his feet, hand to his chest in salute. In the last row, I spotted my mother and Elliot, small, motionless in the flood of cameras. She lowered her head. His eyes darted away. The lens found them, but I didn't say their names. I didn't have to. This project isn't just concrete and steel, I said. It's proof that sometimes what breaks you builds the bridge for everyone else. The room stood as one. The light shone full on me now, and for once, it didn't blind. It illuminated. Afterward, a reporter asked, "What do you say to those who doubted you?" I smiled. They're part of the foundation, too. You can't build without a little pressure. That night in my decked hotel room, sleep wouldn't come. The hum of the air conditioner blended with the distant rush of the Potomac, like waves echoing in a memory I hadn't yet released. I opened my laptop and began to type a letter I knew would never be mailed. Dad, you'd be proud today. I built something that will stand against the sea and against small minds. They said I was a burden, but I carried myself out of the storm. You taught me that strength isn't loud, it's steady. I miss you. I printed it, folded it neatly, and held it for a moment before taking it down to the river at sunrise. The wind lifted the page, caught it like a sail, and carried it away. Back in my room, my phone buzzed. A message from Commander Harris read, "You've inspired thousands. Bernetta? The Foundation's donation site is overwhelmed." A few minutes later, an email from my bank arrived, a $50,000 anonymous donation. I didn't need to ask who it was. Elliot. I sat by the window, watching the early light break across the water. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about accepting apologies. It was about refusing to let the hurt speak for me anymore. NBC called again, asking for a comment on the family's reaction. "Some truths," I said, "speak loudest in silence." By evening, the TV played a segment titled "The Face of Resilience." They showed me walking off the conference stage, then cut to a quote on the screen. "She didn't fight her family. She outgrew them." I smiled. That was justice, the kind that didn't need a verdict, only peace. Summer settled over Maine like a long exhale. I returned to inspect the finished Tidelock Harbor, the sky bright and endless above steel-gray water. The new concrete pillars rose from the sea like vertebrae, strong, unyielding, built to endure what once broke me. I walked slowly along the pier, the soft click of my crutch blending with the pulse of the waves. Locals nodded as I passed, their eyes different now, no pity, only quiet respect. At the railing, I stopped and looked out at the harbor bearing my name. "The same ocean that almost took my legs," I whispered, "now carries my name." The wind smelled of salt and metal. I closed my eyes and saw my father's face. The night I left home, the woman I'd become since. Out past the docks, a white sail crossed the horizon, small, fearless, free. "They threw me away after my accident," I murmured. "But truth rises with the tide, and I rose with it. No music, just the sound of waves, and my voice, steady, unbroken. Sometimes being cast away is how you finally learn to float."